Welcome back to the Blazor Server In-Depth course. In this lesson, we're going to be looking at the configuration system that's built into Blazor Server. All right, so let's go over to Visual Studio. We'll create a new project. Mode. So how does this all work? Well, that's all set up by the defaults in this Create Default Builder. And here's what happens. Let's go up here. I'm going to write this down so you can see it. So with configuration, we used to have an app.config or a web.config, depending if you were a desktop app or a web app. So a Blazor server app would by default have a web.config file if it were running in .NET Framework. Well, we're not running in .NET Framework, we're running .NET Core. .NET Core said, this was okay, but it wasn't great. First of all, it used XML for configuration. That's not real fun. JSON's easier. But also, it didn't have built in a great way for overriding those settings. Now, it did have some, and there were tools like Slow Cheetah that would help you do even more, but it really wasn't awesome. And so what they came up with is this idea of this ever-expanding level of configurations you can add on top of each other. So I'm going to add these in kind of reverse order, meaning I'm going to start at the bottom and the last, well, let's start at the top. Let's start at the top. We're going to start with a chained configuration. And what that means is if you pass in a configuration to the configuration system, it will take that information in. So you can actually have multiple configuration systems and kind of connect them together. Now, configuration is just any set of settings. So in this case, we have like allowed host. It's a simple one. Well, that's a property, and there's the value for it, star. All right. So this is a little more complicated. It's an object. We've got the curly brace, and inside here is another object. And inside here are a bunch of properties. So default is a property, and the value is information. Microsoft is a property, and the value is warning. So these are all property value pairs potentially inside of objects. Okay, so that's the configuration, and we can pull from a previous configuration and add it to the one we're building now. But then we have settings that might override those settings that you pulled in. And the first place we're going to override from is the app settings.json. And what this means is if you had a setting in your configuration I just pulled in that was called allowed hosts, and it said test. Well, since I'm now also bringing in app settings.json, which also has this value of star will overwrite anything you've had in the previous configurations. All right, so the latest one overwrites previous ones if the values match, if the property names match. So in this case, allowed host. Or if I went logging log level default of information, well, this would overwrite something else that has a logging log level default of debug. We saw that in action with this next value. which is app settings dot environment dot JSON. And I put that environment in the angle brackets because this gets replaced with whatever environment you're running in. Remember, under properties, we have the environment is development, which means that when you're running in development, it'll be app settings.development.json. And that will override the settings in app settings.json. We saw that. So we had to make changes here in app settings.development.json, the default, to override this value. Now the cool thing is you don't have to have a mirror image of all the settings. Notice there is no setting. Here is allowed hosts is star. There is no allowed hosts over here. What it's going to do is say, okay, I didn't find one there. So what I'm going to do instead is go to the next level higher and find it there. And it will go all the way up the chain until it finds this value. So it may be that if it can't find a setting here and it can't find it here, maybe it was brought in from a previous configuration. All right. Now there's even more levels. App secrets, which is technically secrets.json, but it's different for every single application, right? And this only runs in development mode. What this is for when you're building your application on your computer, you might want to have certain settings. For example, maybe I have a local SQL server I connect to, but I don't want to give that information to all my coworkers. So I don't want to have those settings just kind of passed around to everybody. Even if they were in the development JSON, that really wouldn't work because it's my local SQL server. It's not the SQL server that the whole team shares for development. And that's where my app secrets can come in, because this is local just to my machine and it is only for development mode. And we'll see how I configure those. All right. And then these next two we probably won't use, but you can use, and that's environment variables. And then finally, the command line. Have that you obviously would not want to have checked into source control. So we'll spend the majority of our time looking at these three levels here, these three right here, because those are the ones you're going to use the most. But just note that these other three are in the mix when you set up the defaults. Now the really cool thing is you can add even more. So if you want, and this is a very common thing to do, if you're deploying to Azure or even if you're not, Azure has the concept of a thing called Key Vault. Okay, so Azure Key Vault, what it does is it safely stores encrypted values for you for your configuration. And what you can do is you can use this to override previous settings in production. And then your developers even don't have to have any access or can't have any access to your SQL Server credentials or to other secret information. They're all encrypted in Azure Key Vault, and at runtime the system will pull from Key Vault based upon some settings. So just note you can add to this later on. I'll show you that real quick just so you can see what you do. Again, under Create Default Builder, you would say configure app configuration right down here. And then you'd say config, and you do your arrow. And then in here you could say config dot, there's an add environment variable, add JSON file, add in memory collection, or if you add the NuGet package for add key vault, it'd be add key vault. And then you do a little bit of configuration and you're good to go. And that would add to what you already have here. All right, so it'd be a cumulative thing. All right, so let's see what this actually even means. Why is it helpful? How do we use it? Those kind of things. So let's go over to let's make it easy and go to weather forecast service. So in here, what do you say we put a setting we want to pull in from here that is the number of days to add to our weather forecast? Okay, so instead of hard coding from 1 to 5, let's put a value. We're going to put in app settings.json. So I'm going to put a comma here. I'm going to say weather forecast days. I'm going to say 4. All right, that's the default in app settings.json. Now notice I just put a comma and put another property here. You can do that. It's a free form thing. You get to choose what your property names are, what your object names are. Just put them in. Now, if I was going to do more configuration with weather forecast, I'd probably create an object first that was like weather forecast. And inside there, forecast days or something like that, where I could have a little bit more grouping of my settings. And we'll do that in just a minute. But first, let's just put it right in the root. Weather forecast days is 4. So now over here in forecast service, I need to get the configuration information. Well, let's create a constructor first. And in here, I'm going to ask for an I configuration. Control dot to add the using Microsoft.extensions.configuration. I'll say config. Control dot to create and initialize the field. And now I have this private read-only I configuration field that I can now use, for example, down here. So I could put it directly, but let's actually pull it out as a separate value. Int upper value equals config dot get value. All right, and the value is going to type int. I'm going to say here is the name of the configuration, which I forget. It's weather forecast days. So weather forecast days. Now this get value here, what it did is it said, okay, we want to make sure that your value comes back in the right type. Strongly typed. So therefore, what type is it? And I said, well, it's an int. I could have said it's double. That would still work because it's still a number. And so it would have cast that value to a double. But in this case, I said cast it to type int. That does mean you can't put quotes around it because then it wouldn't be an int, it would be a string. So make sure you have the type right, but this way it gives me a strong type of upper value. Now I can change this over here to say upper value, and that should give us our forecast number of days. Let's put a breakpoint here and let's run our application. All right, it's running, and let's go to our fetch data, and it hit the breakpoint, but it didn't pop underneath, so let's move it over. Let's look at the locals window, which has the upper value of 4. That's what it pulled from the forecast days. Now if we let this continue, note we have 4 days worth of settings. If we stop this, we don't change anything to our code, we just change our, well, you know what? Let's not even change appsettings.json. Let's copy this and go to appsettings.development.json because we're in development mode and say, you know what? I want to make sure you get the levels correct, but I want to change this to be 10 for development mode. All right. Remember, if we look at our levels here, the app settings dot whatever environment you're in, so app settings dot development.json will override the settings of app settings.json. Let's run this again. And this time we should see that we have 10 items. And we do. We have 10 now. Now, remember I said that if you have more than one setting, you probably want to group it in some way. And I'd probably do something like this, where I said whether here. Well, what you do is you use a colon and the value. So weather forecast colon forecast days. That will get the upper value. Now, I don't have to change development because this won't get pulled because it's not the same tag. I can run this and I should see 6 because that's what's in app settings.json under that new tag. And sure enough, I have 6 values. If I wanted to override that in development, I would have to recreate this structure. And then I can make a change in here to say 2. And now if I run this, I should see only 2. There we go, just the 2. So that's how you work with app settings.json, app settings.development or .production.json. And note, yes, you have both of those options because .production, so app settings.production.json, you can use that for on your servers themselves. So maybe you have settings in production mode that you want to override from the defaults. You can do that. That's why back over here I said environment, because it could be whatever environment you have. You could have one for staging. So these all will override based upon whatever environment you're in. All right. Now let's talk about the secrets. So this would be settings I would store on my computer. Well, the easiest way of setting up secrets, and it is per app, is to right-click on your Blazor app project and say Manage User Secrets. Click that, and it creates a secrets.json file. And if you notice, it gives you this path that is not in my project. That's because we don't want any way for this to get committed to source control. This is not going to your source control. This is not going to your repository. This stays on just this computer, and it's just for you to do private testing. All right, so it's your private information. This is not encrypted. So let's paste in those values here. So with our forecast days, let's make this 15 instead. Now remember that in our hierarchy, we have app settings.json getting overwritten by app settings.environment.json, which gets overwritten by app settings.secrets or secrets.json, but only in development mode. So my secrets has a value for forecast days of 15. My development has a value of 2, and my app settings has a value of 6. Let's run this again. And because we're now using secrets, we should see 15 for our data, and we do. So that's really helpful. But what if I close out of this secrets.json? Well, the good news is you can always go back and say Manage User Secrets, and it comes back. But where does this live? Well, secrets all live in the same general location. Let me paste in for you. Let's put it in program.cs. The secrets location is this location right here. First of all, app data. That's the location on your machine in your profile, so it's different for every person. But if you use this right here, this will take you to the right spot on your computer. Okay? So app data /Microsoft /user secrets, and then there's going to be a JSON. Let's see this. You're going to paste that path in and hit enter. And now notice there's a bunch of secrets here. There's a bunch of different GUIDs. Well, each one of these has a secrets.json inside of it. Which one is ours? Well, you could look at the date it was created, or what you can do is click on Blazor app. And notice it opens up the CS proj file. In here, there's a new tag called user secret ID. In this case, it starts with 7271. Well, if I look here, there's 7271. I open that up, and there is my secret. And if I were to open this in Notepad++, there is my secret. So you can still get to it even outside of Visual Studio, even without the use of your editor. Now, it used to be you'd have to add this secret manually to your project.json, but now with the tooling, it gets added automatically for you when you right-click and say Manage User Secrets for the first time. So just note that's there. If you really wanted to reuse secrets between projects, you could just take this same GUID and copy it to your new project, and then both projects would see the same secret.json. That's possible, and there may be a use case for that, but just note that then if you make a change for one project, it will affect the other project as well. All right, now you probably would have guessed already, but we in here brought in the config information in our weather forecast service. How do you do that on a Razor page? Well, you take this using statement right here, and just like with logging, let's go to index.razor, you would say @using and bring in our using statement, and then we'll have also @inject, and then we're going to say iConfiguration and call it config, and then in your code, you can start using that. So protected, override, and let's do on initialized like so. And yes, they're working on fixing this, just so you know. It shouldn't mess up like that, but it is a rather complex thing they're doing. So with this, we can say, let's just put a breakpoint here. So we will say int val equals config dot get value int, and that value was, I forget, but we can figure that out by going to right here and getting it weather forecast : forecast days. All right, so we get an integer that is that value. We can put a breakpoint right after and make sure that val is correct. So it should hit that breakpoint. It did, and val is 15. Why is it 15? Because of our secret. Our secret is overriding the value of development and also overriding the value of app settings.json. So that's how you would get the value in your Razor page. Now, note whenever you pull up the config, there's other suggested types like get connection string is another one. So connection string is a pretty common thing to ask for in app settings.json or one of their equivalents. And so that get connection strings is just a shortcut for connection strings. Okay, and we'll use that when we start working with data and databases in a few lessons. All right. So, but until then, Just note that that's there. It's a shortcut is all it is. You could use get value and get a connection string. It's just a little bit quicker to use get connection string. All right. So that's all for this lesson. Now it's time to practice what you've learned. Practice how to tweak and play with your app settings.json and your app settings.development.json. See what happens when you change over. Let's just do that real quick. We're going to change over to production. Remember, it was showing, I think, 15 values on our page. Let's see what it hits now. So it's loading up, and it says 6 is the value now. So if we hit continue, we'll only ever see 6 entries. It in your code. Okay, so try that out, figure it out, make sure you understand how to use it. It'll be very important. Okay, once you do that, come on back for the next lesson.